Greetings and thank you for joining us for the Future of International Education, Leadership Perspectives from Around the World, focusing today on Europe. Everybody is currently in listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to type in questions throughout the presentation, and these will be directed to the panelists during the Q&A period. So please do feel free to type your questions in throughout the presentation, and I will hand it over now to Dr. Allan Goodman.
Claire, thank you very much, and thanks to our colleagues at the University of California at Davis. Joanna Rebelska is listening in. It was her idea to create this series. We've covered many different university systems and many different continents, and we really appreciate all who have signed up to participate and to also ask their questions. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you're listening from. We have a terrific panel. I'm going to pose a couple of questions and a round of questions at the very beginning. That'll take us about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll go. Meanwhile, you'll be typing in your questions, and I'll be reading them, and then we'll direct. If you're going to direct a question to a particular panelist, please do that. Otherwise, I'll try to make the assignments. So I'm going to start with Peter in Edinburgh. Adam Smith was not such a great fan of universities, which he found tended to be organized for the, quote, ease of their masters, unquote. Nothing has been easy about the period we're going through, neither for professors nor for students. And yet society expects a lot of universities in crisis and post-crisis periods. What is the role of the university in this period, and what do you think it will be in the post-crisis period? So I'll ask Peter first, and then the same question to the other panelists. Peter.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks to everybody for the invitation and for joining today. So universities are very durable, resilient organizations. Universities have been around for hundreds of years. They've survived war and civil disturbance and famine and all sorts of upheaval. Since the time of Adam Smith, the universities in Scotland have been part of that scene. So they are very resilient organizations. They're also rather conservative organizations, conservative with a small c, and they're rather resistant to change. And so I think what universities need to do is to adapt. In our response to coronavirus, we're not talking about recovery here, because we think recovery implies that you'll go back to the previous situation and or that you'll recover completely and quickly. We don't think that any of those things apply, so we're talking about adaptation, adapting to a new set of circumstances. And I think the universities that do well through all this process will be the ones that adapt most successfully. At the University of Edinburgh, we were proud of our digital capability before all this, and we knew that we had a lot of talented staff and a lot of technical expertise in online education, but we had no idea whether we could shift the entire provision of the university, all of our teaching and all of our assessment online very rapidly, as we had to do in response to the pandemic. We did that successfully. We're trying to do it in a much more sophisticated way for the next semester, as we hope to welcome back returning students and new students very soon in Edinburgh. The term in Scotland starts at the end of August, beginning of September, so it's very soon for us. And we recognize that there will have to be adaptation. There'll have to be differences about the way in which we teach our students, the way in which they're assessed, and the way in which they live their lives. We're talking about a hybrid delivery model of a mixture of some online, some face-to-face, and making the best of every situation we can whilst trying to preserve people's safety. So it will be different, it will be hybrid, but I still think it'll be a high quality experience. And I'm a very profound believer in the value of education as a social mobility tool and as a transformational tool for people's lives. And our job as university leaders is to try and make sure that we can still provide that under very different and very difficult and challenging and actually rapidly changing sets of external circumstances.
We sure are living in week to week in periods of rapid change, both in terms of what regulations affect students and universities, and also the health situation. So I think adaptation and resilience are really key words. Peter, thank you. Sari, I want to turn to you. There is a Finnish proverb that says emergency finds the way. In America, it's necessity is the mother of invention. We sure have had to find our way through this. As you look at things from the University of Helsinki in Finland, what role is the university playing in the crisis, and do you expect it will play in the post-crisis period?
Thank you, Allan, and it's a really big pleasure for me to participate in this panel. I very much agree what Peter already said about universities being traditional and quite slow in any change. But this has proven, at least what has happened in Finland, that we are actually more adaptable, and we have been forced to do big changes in a very short time. But the role I think is of universities is really pivotal and even more important in times of global crisis and post-crisis. And this also, to me, it concerns both education and research. The more difficult the global situation is, the more important universities become, and the more we need international collaboration. For the University of Helsinki, societal interaction is very important, and the important role of research and higher education is even highlighted during such crises. Universities have the responsibility to support societies during global crises, in particular by providing decision makers analysis and even empirical evidence of the situation and of possible solutions. Maintaining international education and international research collaboration has of course been very challenging during COVID-19. Some universities were totally closed and others changed from face-to-face to digital education. And Finnish universities remained open, but we had to make a huge digital leap in a very short time, namely in a couple of days. And the digital leap was surprisingly easy and successful at the University of Helsinki. I share a lot of similar experiences what Peter already explained in his speech. And I have seen that both students and teachers have adapted extremely well. We have prepared ourselves as well as possible to receive our new international students, but possibilities to begin studies next fall, as well as possibilities to even enter Finland vary. So this is problematic for us at the moment. We have also a lot of applicants who did not receive their bachelor's degrees because of their universities were closed during COVID-19 crisis, and we unfortunately cannot give permission to begin master studies before bachelor graduation. So this is a problem we are trying to solve at the moment, and we are also looking at possibilities to organize digital studying possibilities for our international students, but this option, however, requires changing the law, and we don't yet know whether that will be successful or not. So this is the situation in Finland and at the University of Helsinki at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you also point up in many regions, many large university systems depend on the bachelor's being issued, national exams being taken and passed, and many people are in limbo as they have to figure out what to do. But thank you very much for your perspective. I want to turn to Serge now in Paris. Ironically or happily, just down the street from where we live in Washington, we have a restaurant in the middle of the crisis that put up a huge banner quoting Victor Hugo, who said that even in the darkest night will end and the sun will rise. And it really cheered our neighborhood. It cheered the people that drove by. It reminded us that the sun does rise. Where is France and where is the Sorbonne in terms of the darkest night and the sunrise? Have we turned a corner, and as we do so, what role should the university be playing? Serge?
Well, merci, Allan, for your kind and very optimistic introduction. First, I would like, of course, to thank the organizers and UC Davis for inviting us to this panel to share our experience and thoughts for the near future. Obviously, there are commonalities with the statements of my colleagues, as we have to share global responsibility and common missions and roles. So Sorbonne also started very early to question itself about the impact of the COVID-19 on our roadmap and the main action to be taken to shape it accordingly. So let me share with you just a few points. So our first responsibility, as it was mentioned before, is to support the continuity of our missions. As global universities, continuity means that we have the responsibility to remain open. Education and research are essential pillars of our society, as well as public service. And we will certainly have to contribute to restore the public trust in science that has been lost a little bit in this COVID pandemic. We are even more confident that we have a global responsibility to focus on sustainable development goals in research and education, educating the workforce and future citizens. Today, of course, the COVID is high on the list, but there are other important topics such as environment and climate change, digital transformation and artificial intelligence, the One Health challenge, and many others. So the multiplicity and complexity of crises confirms the need for global interdisciplinary research and education. And those are topics with a global challenge and the local implementation that certainly present the most important potential for impact and transformative effect. So the second point that we have been very careful is to take good care of our communities. Obviously, we have to ensure that our students and staff are safe and well. So for students, that also means making sure they don't drop out, because of the crisis. And ultimately, we should enforce equity of access, and especially dealing with hybrid education. So we often complain, as you know, but in time of crisis, we can also see the advantages of publicly funded universities. They are very solid financially and can ensure continuity, as they are by design very protective of their communities. So in such chaotic situation, our mission of public service is even more meaningful than ever. So maybe just a note on the post-crisis. We started, of course, to address this concern, and we believe universities should contribute to address the issues created by the crisis. So we are economic stakeholders with societal impact, and we have a role in finding solutions to the short and longer term problems that crises entail. So it could be to address the evolution of the labor market, because as you know, following the health crisis, we are facing a very big economical one, as well as consider an increasing demand for professional education and lifelong learning. And moreover, we should take a role to support transfer to market, especially in order to address emerging economical and societal domains together with the relevant stakeholders. So for instance, and just to close, I can mention the new EU Green Deal to build a greener, more inclusive, digital and sustainable Europe, and increase resilience to future crises, so that the climate crisis. I'll stop here, Allan.
Merci, Serge. Thank you for that perspective. Matilde, I couldn't possibly introduce you without also mentioning Cervantes, because I did find that Don Quixote described the situation we're all living in and working in. He said from so little sleeping and so much reading, his brain dried up and he went completely out of his mind. And I'm sure all of us on the call feel that way by the end of the week. As we pivoted to this new reality, the work has become ever more intense, and the role of the university, wherever we are, is ever more important. So Matilde, over to you and the perspective from Spain.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you to UC Davis for the kind invitation. It is true, right? I a little bit like Don Quixote, like you mentioned. A week after I was already at home, because you know that on the 14th of March, the country, Spain country, was totally shut down, so we had to be at home for we didn't know how long. And at this moment, I was thinking, well, what happened, right? And the other thing I was thinking is, as part of a university, could we have done something to avoid that? That was my first question I had at that point. Then I was thinking, well, we could not have done anything to avoid it. For sure, what we have done at some point is foresee what it would eventually happen. The point is that what is our role now? Because I don't really think that we should shift any roles. At the end, universities are here. We work on one side for individuals, for the people, to provide education, to provide for training for professional, and on another side, we are also here for research, right? To give a service also on the research side for society. So that I don't think it should change at all. My feeling is that what we should do is, now that we know that we can have a situation like that, to better prepare people on one side to handle this kind of situations, to work on environment highly changes. We are always talking about soft skills, providing students with soft skills, the global world, changing environment. But this is a clear example that this can happen, right? And from one day to another. So our students should be our people that are with us should be prepared for that. And on the other side, the research is an excellent tool to minimize the impact of future crises. To work not only on the health areas, which of course we are now, everyone is really concerned about when the vaccine is going to be ready for this. Trying to go back a little bit to normal, but also in many other areas, right? So we have to think also about economy, technology, and many other areas that research that the research that universities do can really be of help. So the situation in Carlos III is that after, as I mentioned before, closing the university from one day to another, we all have to move to digital teaching, online teaching, right? And after that, since we have been for 3 months like that, we have to move to assessment online and so on. So now that we have been able to handle this situation, we are preparing for next year. And one main concern is on one side to keep all the research areas working actively. We know there are going to be many restrictions, but we are working hard on that. And on the other side, given the health situation and the restrictions that we are going to have, also to provide the best education environment or teaching environment that we can do. University is going for blended teaching. We do believe in the presence of the students in the campus, and we are trying at some point to reduce the presence of the students, but without losing that part at all. So that's the situation right now with us. Thank you.
Matilde, thank you so very much. I'm going to do one round of quick question to all the panelists because we're getting lots of questions from the audience. One thing that unites us all on this call is that we are responsible for the internationalization and international relations of our universities. We're committed internationalists. And I want to start with Peter. How, if at all, has your strategy for internationalization changed at Edinburgh?
Well, in terms of ethos and philosophy, not one iota. And I would say actually probably, if anything, been reaffirmed by everything that we've experienced. But of course, in terms of practicality, there are some challenges. I mean, we see internationalization as bi-directional. So we try to create a very international community here. And that's one of the reasons why international students and staff are so important to us. And also we think of it in terms of outward mobility. We have the additional challenge, of course, of Brexit, which preceded coronavirus. The University of Edinburgh is the largest contributor to Erasmus, both in terms of students leaving the UK and students coming to the UK of any UK university. So if we don't have the opportunity to continue to participate in in Erasmus after Brexit, and I'm sad to say that that does look as if that's what's going to be the outcome, then we have to have an alternative scheme which encourages mobility of our students. And we hope that that can resume once travel restrictions and public health restrictions are relaxed accordingly. In terms of international collaborations, I mean, we're in a number of international alliances, including with some of the other universities represented on the call, and we're very keen that we continue to be active participants in those. I think one silver lining, I think, from the pandemic is that we now have all become very familiar with online technologies, which perhaps we were a little bit suspicious of before. We weren't sure they would work. We weren't sure that they would be inclusive or that everybody would have access. And I think increasingly it's been demonstrated to us that these online methods of communication can work perfectly well and even across time zones. So I think we need to harness some of that. I think we need to think about ways in which we can continue our international activity in a time of travel restrictions. And maybe that's not a bad thing, with us all thinking that we should travel less anyway because of the climate implications of travel. So I do think there are some important learnings that we can make. But in terms of our commitment to internationalization, absolutely as firm as ever, and certainly as long as I'm in my present role, then the University of Edinburgh will seek to maintain its international credentials.
Peter, thank you. Could I turn to Sari for the same question? Has anything changed in your internationalization strategy?
No, I would say that nothing has changed. We also share the same practical problems receiving students or visiting researchers and our staff traveling abroad. That's the only problem, but I see the same kind of positive sides from being virtual in our research collaboration and in our teaching as well. And as Edinburgh and Helsinki are members of the same universities network among 6 other universities, and our aim has been from the beginning to enhance virtual exchange. So maybe this crisis taught us something about how we can do that even at a faster pace than we anticipated at the beginning when the Una Europa was founded. But I would say from my side, from the University of Helsinki, that we absolutely need to be international. I come from a country of a very small number of inhabitants who speak Finnish and Swedish as our mother tongue. So if we continued using our native languages, no one would know that we even existed, and no one could do research collaboration or teaching collaboration together with us. So it is a necessity in Finland and at the University of Helsinki to be international. So has been the starting point from the beginning, and it will be. So nothing has changed in this issue. So we need to remain in the world of universities, and internationalization is the only way.
Thank you. Serge, has anything changed in your job or strategy of international relations?
Well, just the opposite, I will say. I mean, it is really unfortunate to observe that the crisis is going to reinforce inward-looking attitudes from governments as well as citizens. And it's very clear for us that universities have to fight these tendencies to clearly expose scientific cooperation very high on their roadmaps. So I will say, of course, we had to face similar practicalities, but it was very important for us to very clearly put internationalization very high on the roadmap in order to balance the consequences of the COVID situation. The second point is that, of course, the pandemic necessitated an anticipated and abrupt switch to virtual classes, and will likely result in an increasingly hybrid mix of the physical and virtual campus, as it was observed by most of the speakers. So we believe this heterogeneous mix of students is here to stay. Of course, it means keeping up with a very strong digital infrastructure, but we believe the disruption will just be enabled by technology, but it is really driven by a broader societal change. So, of course, we also have engaged into hybrid since a while. Although, for instance, for September, we are still optimistic, and we expect that on campus will be by default, and of course, moving into hybrid for different situations. But especially because we believe it is a very important tool to transform our education at Sorbonne. So we have always considered internationalization as a playground to experiment with global research challenges and innovative pedagogies. that should be tightly related. So we are working, for instance, very closely with a small set of strategic international partners and are sharing best practices and experiences. I can cite, for instance, our European University Alliance for EU+, in which we are supporting blended mobility. For example, jointly designed courses that students can follow online, rewarding ECTS credits, and tightly associated with the flagship research projects. So this is being exploited faster now as a result of the demand created by the crisis. So of course, there are some practicality issues, but on the one hand, very high on internationalization, and on the other hand, working on hybrid as well as sustainable development goals.
Thank you. And let me turn to Matilde. Same question, and then we'll go to the questions I'm getting from the audience. Has your strategy changed?
No, I mean, in our case, we are very much aligned with my colleagues. So there is not been a major change on the strategy itself. But what we have to acknowledge at some point is that there is going to be a very, very high impact on the actual situation, on what is going to happen in the coming months regarding internationalization, right? So on one side, Carlos III was working on the attraction of international talent. All the universities compete for that. That is true. But at this moment, we are in a position where the potential candidates may have a problem with moving to a different country, right? So this is going to be a very big barrier. On the other side, the attraction of international students, which is also one of our key areas of work for internationalization, it's going to be I wouldn't say fully stopped, but we have to think that study abroad programs, and at this point, thinking about traveling to Spain for the coming semester, there are many universities, many international students that are really thinking about it, like probably delaying for another semester or for another year. And finally, the mobility, the exchange programs. At this moment, we are already looking at the figures, right? So it is true that we have a strong support from the Erasmus Plus program in terms of flexibility. So they are redefining all the potential type of mobility so that we can somehow accommodate the different scenarios in which each of the universities we are going to be moving, right? But if I have to say something, in our case, for example, we already have a reduction of almost 30% of the mobility in terms of Erasmus. And if we talk about mobility outside Europe, this is going all the way down to 80%. So the reduction of 80%. So that is a lot. So we are on the same line in terms of strategy, but what we are really working hard as a major changing is to cope with the uncertainty that we have now, right? Because we don't really know what is going to happen next semester, next year, if students are going to be able to move, if people are going to be willing to move to another country, and so on. And the other major change is that we are trying not to be complacent. We are trying to, even though it may seem very difficult at this moment to develop or to encourage any mobility program, we are still thinking that as long as we can provide mobility, blended mobility, virtual mobility, or full presence mobility, we are for sure going to work for that. So that's the situation now. Thank you.
Appreciate that very much. A question for any of the panelists. Are you hearing that students feel they will be tainted in the future or stigmatized by being the COVID-19 generation, the ones that had a pivot to online learning, that didn't have the usual university experience? Is this on students' minds today? Anybody, please?
I'm happy to comment on that, Alan, if I can. So Peter Mathieson here. I mean, we do see that as a concern that students are thinking about. It's not top of their list, but I think it's our responsibility to make sure that that's not the case. And I do think that the value of a university degree and the value of a university experience should actually remain a marker of distinction irrespective of what era that it's obtained. And so I think that's our job to make sure that that's not the case. Going back to a point that was made earlier on about the, I think it was Serge that talked about the challenge to the role of the university and the science in terms of expertise. I mean, we've seen a sort of short-term improvement in the extent to which universities are valued because of the provision of advice about how to cope with the pandemic, but that's very fragile, and we're starting to already, certainly in the UK, see some evidence that the disagreement between experts is starting to be counterproductive. I mean, we think of universities as places of debate and places of disagreement where you can have an argument or a discussion about something and then resolve it or not resolve it. But you certainly, in having the discussion, you study the question at hand. That's starting to play out in some of the media here, where one expert is being played against another. You know, we locked down too soon, or we didn't lock down soon enough. You know, we should have had travel bans, or we should have done this, we should have done that. And actually that could be counterproductive. So I think there is a risk to this sort of temporary feeling that universities have been more valued because they're places of expertise. And now we're starting to see that not go quite so smoothly here. So I think that it's complicated. There are risks and benefits, but in terms of the COVID-19 cohort and the COVID-19 generation, I think it's our job to make sure that they get every bit as good of a university experience as any previous cohort.
Amen. Thank you.
If I may comment on this, yeah. Very similar here in France. So the debate between the stakeholder, the citizen, and the scientist was pretty bad. Certainly, you heard about the chloroquine situation and so on. So I won't comment on this. With respect to the students, yeah, it's precisely a responsibility, especially for the students who are going to enter university next year. So what we are going to organize is basically remediation and tutorship, because it is a responsibility to make sure that we can bridge the gap between the experience that they had because of the COVID and the expectation that we have with them entering into the university.
Can I also, is there time to comment on the student experience?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good question you asked. My feeling at the moment is that it's probably there's various experiences. If we have some data on our students from their experiences from this spring, and the students' experiences vary. So it might be that some students really feel that COVID has had a big effect on their study experiences and their study progress. But we have experience and evidence that some students have actually liked it more than they anticipated. So there's a kind of very big, huge leap in their self-respect and self-efficacy, that they feel that actually I can do it alone from home. And I thought that I was more reliant on teachers. And then we have a group of students who say that it has been, I have managed, but with struggle, but I have been struggling. And then we have, unfortunately, students who have experienced more stress than previously. So we can see the spectrum of experiences that students have experienced, that and it's our responsibility to take care that the stress levels of students don't remain high for a very long time. And this fall, when we receive new students, we have similar plans. What Serge and Peter said, that we really have to take into consideration how these students become members of the university community. So we have a lot of job to do in the near future.
We sure do. Maybe a question again for all, but I could start with Matilde. We also have to assure not only quality but equity. And not every student has access to the same resources, the same devices, the same bandwidth. Could each of the panelists identify something you did and will do to assure greater equity in the fall as we are in a hybrid fall?
Yeah, on our case, we already started right in March with that situation. So we had we established a whole system of loans of computers for students on one side, because the online teaching is about the hardware part and also about the connection, right? So because when we are talking about if the students have enough space or not, that's something the university can actually not do anything at the home, but we can provide computers, we can provide with high-speed connection. So that is what we have been doing so far, and that is what we will be doing starting the coming semester, and not only for students, right? So also there is going to be many staff from the university that will have to work from home the coming semester, and also for the staff of the university is thinking about providing help on these two issues. Yeah.
May I invite the other panelists if they have an observation to add on helping assure equity for all and access?
Yeah, I can if you want.
Please.
We were really very pleased during the difficult period to see the very strong commitments of the faculties to monitor the students individually. And of course, very different situations have been faced by students, and especially obviously inequalities, social inequalities, digital inequalities. And we were very eager to try to enforce some kind of fairness. So for instance, during the crisis, and we are going to have a follow-on on this, we do have scholarship for students in difficult situations. So that basically one of the stupid issues, for instance, is that many of our students work in parallel, and they could not work when we were locked down. And of course, we had to supply them with some support so that they can just live within the current conditions. For the next semester, we would like also to manage the digital inequalities, because it's very difficult to follow a class with a mobile phone. And so we are going to provide a digital package, so to speak, to students in difficult situations, so that at least they have a fair access to the class.
Thank you. Any other comments on this question?
Allan,
I think Serge and Matilde already gave good plans, which I totally agree with. We have also monitored very closely what has happened to our current students during this pandemic crisis, and we have individual information of all students, and we are going to reach all students who haven't earned any credits during the pandemic, and I think it's about that they need tailored help, because the problems probably vary. Most of the students, to my knowledge, need more help in how to manage stress levels and how to cope with the isolation, and because university education in Finland is tuition free, so it's not so much about funding, but of course if you have planned to work alongside of studying and then you are out of work, so then financial situations can also be difficult, and we try to as soon as possible to open the study facilities at the university, but this hasn't happened yet.
Let me assure that. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's Peter. I was just going to, well, firstly, just to say that I completely agree with the comments made by my three colleagues, and I won't repeat them, but those are all, sometimes it's about equipment, sometimes it's about broadband. We also recognize that a lot of our students need to come to campus to get access to good Wi-Fi, and we're trying to make sure that they can. The only thing I think I'd add is that sometimes the commodity which is required is time, and people with either caring responsibilities or the need to work or some other constraint on their ability to engage with online education, time can be something that we need to think about for them, and how can we help with those students that have, or students and indeed staff that have other drawing, other things, drawing on their time. And just one sort of note of optimism in relation particularly to staff rather than to students, but I was talking to another international meeting this morning, and the point was made, which I thought was a very good one, which is that the format of online conferences allows some people that would not previously have been able to attend to now attend, either because of cost or because of ability to be away from home or because of travel or whatever. So there is a sort of a bright side to this, which is that sometimes, particularly, this may apply more to staff than students, but things which were not possible before in this new world as we adapt may become possible.
Let me assure the panelists that many of the questions we're getting are being answered by what you're saying. We are indeed getting a lot of questions. We'll share them all with you afterwards. Peter, one of your alumni asks, is there a role for the alumni? And I would pose this to everybody. Is there a role for alumni to help students today, to help students as the crisis takes whatever turn it's going to take? Are there plans to engage the alumni?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, yes. And I hope there's at least one of my alumni on the call, but to any alumni at the University of Edinburgh, if we're not getting it right and we're not communicating with you as well as we should, then please tell me, and we need to address that. But I mean, yes, absolutely a role for alumni, both in terms of obviously in terms of philanthropic support. We've already asked our alumni for help with some of the coronavirus related research, for example. We needed to very rapidly get some funding, and our alumni have been very generous in doing that. And also in terms of student hardship, including some of the things that we've talked about in terms of providing equipment to students that don't have their own equipment. So there's the philanthropic aspect of it, but I always think of alumni relations as being so much more than fundraising. There are so many ways in which our alumni all over the world can help us. We have students that may or may not be able to get back to Edinburgh. And if alumni can help with them wherever they are in the world, then provide them with a contact point and a link to the university. Absolutely. And I suppose the other role that I always encourage when I'm thinking about alumni is that we want our alumni to give us their advice, give us the benefit of their experience. I mean, we have people, we have 250,000 alumni that we're in touch with all over the world, and these are vast pool of expertise and experience that we need to make better use of than we probably currently do. So absolutely, yes, at any time there's a major role for the alumni in the university, but perhaps more than ever at the moment.
Thank you. My daughter is one of your alumni and very active with the organization, so thank you.
Good, well, I'm grateful.
Anybody
for that.
else want to comment on alumni?
Yeah, I would like to comment. I see alumni as extremely important for our university, especially from the point of view of raising awareness of the working life demands of today's society and today's working life. I think we have been creating, especially for the bachelor's programs, a very tight link between studying and working life, and alumni play a key role in these new initiatives. And I think we have very good experiences how important alumni can be in supporting career development of career identity of the students or the academic identity in specific disciplines. So I see not only related to fundraising, but especially on this side of really being involved with the students of ours.
An excellent point. They have a lot to offer. Yes. Other comments on alumni from Matilde or Serge?
Well, pretty similar, not much difference with what my colleagues have said before. In addition, because we have an international presence of alumni, we use them a lot as well with respect to these global challenges and providing us with experiences of the local conditions.
Thank you.
Yeah, on my side, I fully agree with also with the view of Sari, because I think the part of of course is we always talk about the philanthropic part and the support to the universities, but I think at this point it's very important also to give their professional view, right? How are things in companies? How are things outside the university? So that the university itself, the professors and also the students are prepared for what is outside where we are right now. So yeah, that would be my idea on how alumni can have a high impact on the situation that we have right now. Yeah.
Thank you. We're also getting a lot of questions about how you would advise us to think in North America, to think about whether come May, come next summer, 2021, it will be possible for our students to come and researchers to come back to your universities. Do you have any guidance for us on how best to think about that while we're in North America and things we should be planning for? I know it's impossible to predict beyond another week in this crisis, but already we have lots of interest by students and scholars who want to return to Europe. It's just a question of when. And so what do you think things will be like by late spring?
Allan, let me try and ask the impossible question. I'll answer the impossible question. I mean, so our largest group of international students at the University of Edinburgh are from China, and our second largest are from North America, mostly America and some from Canada as well. And we in all of our communications, we're trying to give them as much certainty as we can. I think people yearn for certainty, and it's very difficult to provide certainty. But what we can say is that we're paying attention to their safety, so we know that people are concerned about their own safety and the safety of their loved ones. We're paying attention to their healthcare. Should they get sick, we've got to make sure we have mechanisms for taking care of them in that eventuality. We're also wanting to guarantee that we have zero tolerance of any xenophobic or stereotyping type behaviours or remarks made by anybody. We don't see that as an enormous issue in Scotland, which is a very welcoming society to international visitors from all over the world, including the United States. And so I think we're trying to understand the things that people are worried about, and we're trying to make sure they get as much certainty as possible. But we do have to accept that that there is uncertainty. The government, at the government level, the current UK government has made some helpful changes to the visa situation, whereby students have an eligibility to stay after their studies for a longer period than was the case until quite recently. This may be particularly helpful with students from places like India that previously have been discouraged from coming to the UK because our visa regime was felt to be unfriendly, but also to American students. I mean, the other university just down the road from me is St Andrews, which has a very high proportion of American students, and it's a wonderful university and a great place to be. It's a small university, so in terms of absolute numbers, actually Edinburgh has more American students than St Andrews, but the proportion is high in St Andrews. And so, we want to encourage them to feel that they can come, that they'll be welcome, that they'll be safe, and that we'll give them the best quality education as dictated by our hundreds of years of tradition that have gone before.
Thank you. We welcome that. Other perspectives, please.
It is really difficult to give any certainties, of course, and we have tried to, of course, we follow actively what's happening in the world, and situation is very different in different countries, and of course we need to follow the national guidelines. Finland just opened entry from some countries, including China, for example. So this is good news for our Chinese foreign students. Like Peter's in Edinburgh, we have the same situation, that Chinese students are the biggest group of our international students. But maybe the kind of approach in Helsinki has been that it's better to be careful and not to give many very big promises, and it's better than to ease the situation if possible. But it is very, very difficult to give guidelines for incoming students because of the situation is kind of we are anticipating a second wave and so on, so we don't know what's happening in the near future. But situation in Finland is very good, so it is a safe country to come in.
I understand. Matilde, an observation?
Yes, in our case, I try to be optimistic. So my hope is that by the second semester in Spain, we are going to be able to welcome many international visitors from all over the countries. So given that situation, which obviously does not depend on the university, but it depends on the country and on the government, the university has been working very hard to ensure security and health in the campus. So for sure, it's going to be a different semester. It's not going to be like probably last spring, but I think it's going to be. In any case, it's going to be a fruitful semester. We really hope that the students are going to be able to attend to classes, at least partially in presence in campus, and not only have the online experience, but also have the cultural and the interaction presence experience. So I hope, and that's my strong belief, that by the second semester things will be better. All the visa issues, hopefully and eventually, will also be solved. So we are also willing to receive lots of international students by spring and also by September. But in September we know the circumstances, so we acknowledge it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Serge,
I
please.
can comment if you want, Professor. But so of course, managing the unknown is difficult, but we have tried to reduce uncertainty, especially for students who have to plan ahead. So the policy at Sorbonne that we have already announced is that we will restrict international mobility only for European students for the first semester. But we expect, of course, assuming that the health conditions are met, that we'll go back to normal for the second semester. So American students are most welcome starting from the second semester.
We've got also, this will be the last round. I want to stay with Serge. Since we're focusing on Europe and Erasmus has been mentioned, and Erasmus Plus, what's the outlook for the Erasmus program in bringing Erasmus scholars into France? And I'd like to ask the Erasmus question of everybody. We'll do Serge, then Matilde, Sari, and we'll conclude with Peter. Serge?
Well, Allan, that's a very important question. Actually, Erasmus Plus, as you know, has a key role in maintaining international education opportunities for European students. And I believe this crisis is an opportunity for the EU to step up and offer solutions supporting alternative forms of mobility while keeping intra-European physical mobility as fluid as proper sanitary measures allow. And we can applaud the very quick decision of the Commission to extend mobility through Erasmus funding somehow to virtual mobility as well. So that's a very good step forward, because it shows that the European Commission can adapt quite quickly in some situations.
Matilde, thank you. How do things look with respect?
Yeah, I mentioned before, I think exchange and mobility programs are one of the pillars of internationalization in our university, and Erasmus is the tool. Without Erasmus, we wouldn't be able to implement and to make the students have those experiences. So for us, it has been extremely helpful, and we do thank the Commission for that. First, on the reactions that initially there were when the pandemic started a couple of months ago. So there was full flexibility to return students back home, full flexibility to recognize the mobilities that have been doing so far as full mobilities and so on. And the situation for the next academic year, it's the same, right? It's flexibility. It's helping the universities to move forward with the programs that we have already started. And I really think that as Serge was mentioning, that this is a proof that going together in Europe, going all together in a hand and with a strong support from the institution, this pandemic is somehow going to be fight.
Thank you. Over to Sari.
Yes, Serge and Matilde already emphasized the importance of Erasmus and Erasmus Plus for the European universities, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important for all European students, because having a possibility to visit other universities, to participate in courses taught by scholars from different countries, and to get to know students from all other countries. So I think it's extremely important for our future generations to really be able to interact in global situation, solving global crises. So it is pivotal for the success of European countries and universities that our students really are able to kind of find their ways in an international world. So really important for us.
Thank you. It's important for all of us. Peter, your perspective.
Yeah, well, I mentioned it earlier on that the Brexit situation, the decision by the British people to leave the EU has a complication for us. My understanding is that nobody in the British government particularly has Erasmus in its sights. Everyone thinks Erasmus is a good thing, but it can't be separated from all the other aspects which have to be agreed between the UK and the EU as the UK leaves. And so we are increasingly of the view that Erasmus, our participation in Erasmus and Erasmus Plus might be threatened. If that does happen, then we have to find additional ways of promoting international mobility, because I think just about every other university leader in the UK believes this is really important for our students, our staff, and for our contribution to the world. And I'm a very proud European. I want those links to be with Europe. Sari's already mentioned Una Europa, which is a new alliance of which Helsinki and Edinburgh are both founder members, and we want to see mobility in the context of that, and we can certainly use those alliances to promote mobility. The UK government has promised that if we don't have Erasmus, we will have an alternative scheme, and that they will work hard to make it a truly global scheme. So there may be opportunities beyond Europe for our students and staff that have not previously been available. But the important point, I think, is the commitment to internationalization, to mobility when it's possible, and if it's not possible physically, then to using digital means to provide international experiences and international collaboration as much as we can in a time of restricted mobility. So the underlying philosophy is very strong. The precise details of how we're going to do it for us is still a little bit uncertain because of Brexit, but I just fundamentally want to make the point that we really believe very strongly in the internationalization of higher education. We think it's in everybody's best interest. And if I may make just one final comment, it would be about the African continent. I like the statistic that of the next 3 billion people to be born on the planet, 2 billion of them will be in Africa. And I think the way in which universities in North America, in Europe, and in Asia engage with Africa will be a very important determinant of the future of higher education.
I'm very grateful for all of your time this evening, and your inspiring leadership and commitment to internationalization. It's needed now more than ever. It's easy to get distracted with having to manage day-to-day the university you're responsible for, but it was very inspiring to hear what all of you said about continuing to do the work that we hope. So on behalf of UC Davis, on behalf of IIE, I want to personally thank each of you and look forward to the time that we can compare notes in person and continue to do it in this medium while we have to. With that, I'm going to turn the program back over to Claire, and she'll conclude the session and describe what's next. Claire?
Thank you so much, Allan, and thanks to you for moderating and to all of our panelists for joining us. Thanks to our audience for tuning in, and please join us for our final panel in this series focusing on Latin America, which will be next Thursday, July 16th. You can register in the same place that you did at the UC Davis website. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great rest of the day and evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.